Welcome back to the D5 Football YouTube channel. This week we're going to be talking about the playoff slash sort of a title race running. We're going to be speaking about teams that we think could be getting in the title race, could be getting into the playoffs, and it's quite a big list than perhaps you might expect at this time of season because of the weird sort of games in hand that people have. You've got games where some teams where they've only played like 29 games, some have played 35, so it's going to be a bit difficult. I'm joined by Lewis, Halifax fan. Obviously, Halifax up there. You're obviously going to speak about your team, but just going to be speaking in general about some teams. Not every single team, because we don't know about exactly every single detail about every single team, but just going to try to sort of give a bit of information where we can, and then hopefully come back sort of before the playoffs, if you like, or once the playoffs have been confirmed and we see all the teams who have got in the playoffs and see how many we sort of get right, if you like. Do you want to start off? I think the best way to start off is obviously you're an Halifax fan. Halifax up there at the start of the season a bit, had a bit of a little bit of a wobble, if you like, dropped down a bit, but have now back up there. Halifax, playoffs realistic for Halifax, do you think?
Yeah, I'd say that I'd go as far as saying they're almost a certainty at the moment, because what I've noticed watching Halifax's games recently is that we're a confident side. Pete Wild's a confident manager. He's making that clear in the press conferences. Sorry, but watching the side play, it's just clear that there's that confidence now that they didn't perhaps have at the start of the season, which maybe led to that poor form. But at the moment, they look like they've got the belief that they could beat anyone, really. Like, you could pit them against Man City, and I think they'd go out to win at the moment. So it is, with Halifax, it is going to be a tough run of fixtures, starting with Wrexham the day after this recording. Then we've got Chesterfield, Bromley, Stockport, Yeovil, Boreham Wood, and then Chesterfield again, just to pick a few out of the upcoming games. So it's a run of form where it's going to be games where it shows what we're made of and whether we do have serious player credentials. But with the confidence we have, I'd certainly be backing us to certainly get in there for sure.
Looking at, you sort of said it's hard to sort of see which teams are and aren't in the sort of the running. How far would you sort of go down? I think you sort of said beforehand you might put it down to Boreham Wood. We sort of said Aldershot on a good run. Which ones would you put it down to?
I would whittle it down to that sort of top 11, really. I mean, you can look at Maidenhead's games in hand, but at the moment, that would only take you up to maybe 4 points off the playoffs, assuming that everyone above them keeps winning. So they are 10 points off the playoffs as it stands. So ultimately, I think the games in hand won't even matter for them. Altrincham and Aldershot, Altrincham, practically everyone above them has games in hand. So you can't, I think their hopes for the playoffs are long gone, unfortunately. Aldershot, they're kind of in decent-ish form at the moment. They're 7th based on the last 10 games in terms of their form. And they did give us a hard game when we played them at the Shea recently, but I just think they're a little bit inconsistent. Every time they seem to win a couple of games, they end up losing a few, and I think ultimately that's what will cost them, really. I think you can only really be looking at Boreham Wood upwards when it comes to the promotion picture.
And Chesterfield, obviously, they've been one of the sort of late risers, if you like, as we always have at the end of the season. Chesterfield, what do you sort of make? Obviously, they're right up there near the top of the form table. What do you make of Chesterfield?
So let's just make it clear that James Rowe has done an absolutely unbelievable job since he'd come in from Gloucester. I thought it was going to be one where they'd appointed him off of one good run he had with Gloucester, because he struggled with them last season. But fair play to him. He's come in, he's brought his own players in, and he's got Chesterfield playing a way that wins them games. They're sound defensively. They're keeping a lot of clean sheets at the moment. And again, it's similar with Halifax. Chesterfield do have that sort of confidence about them, really. So I think they're another one where you can almost say they're a certainty for the playoffs now.
There we go. And look at sort of other teams, you think got the form Chesterfield, and if you do it by last 12 games, they're top of the form table. Obviously, Halifax top of the last 10. And, you know, you might have a look at it, and I think they're sort of Chesterfield fans would just sort of think if it was sort of 5-6 games earlier, we might have come in and he kept to that sort of level. They might sort of think, could they sort of go for the title even sort of, that far off. But, that's 5 or 6 games too late, you might say. And if it'd been their start of the season, you definitely would have said that. But, that's obviously the difference between starting the season and obviously having an impact after a sort of a bit of a sloppy start and not too good. And I think you'd have to sort of fancy Chesterfield, sort of one of the teams. Looks like they're definitely going to get in there now. Obviously, bar a disastrous run with the form they're in, getting into the playoffs, you probably fancy them sort of to win it or do well. But that's obviously the video we're going to do before the playoffs start. Any other teams you sort of look at? As you mentioned, Altrincham, you said that you don't think they're going to get in now, but they were up there for a bit. A few games are up there, look like sort of dark horse. They might sort of do something because people might not have expected. They've obviously dropped off. Any other teams looking at that you think sort of might do well? Wrexham have had their sort of takeover and sort of, you might sort of said they made a few signings recently. Wrexham, are they one you think might do well?
No, I'm going to completely disagree with you on that. I think Wrexham's chances of making the playoffs have gone. So with how Wrexham play, they heavily rely on a target man up front. They had Kwame Thomas up front all season. He was doing quite well for them. He's had an Achilles injury that's ruled him out for the rest of the season. And then their other striker, Jordan Ponticelli, he's also just been ruled out for a little bit. So they were struggling in that regard, but obviously they've made 3 signings now. Chris Sang, Keanu Marsh-Brown, who's a familiar face to this league. And another one they've brought in is that sort of target man. It is Goldo Mateo. Now, I've got to watch him at the start of the season for Halifax, and whilst I do have to maintain professionalism on this sort of podcast, he was awful. He just looked completely out of his depth, which kind of surprised me because he was a big target for Pete Wild, but he just didn't live up to expectations whatsoever. So he ended up being out of the door after about a month, I think. He ended up dropping down to Gloucester, where, to his credit, he did okay. But I think the National League North is his level. So the fact that Wrexham have signed him doesn't bode well for them, I think. And I think if you look at their couple of games that they've just played, they lost 1-0 away at Notts County. They lost 1-0 to Torquay. They got trounced 3-0 at Stockport. So I think that poor run of form is going to continue for them. I mean, you say about the takeover by Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney, but I think it will take until the summer for the fruits of that labour to truly bear. So for this season, I think Wrexham just won't make the playoffs, unfortunately.
Talking more about the title then, for most of the season, it was Torquay near the top, and it looked like for a bit Torquay were going to run away and get 100 points or something like that. They had a bit of dip in form and have sort of recovered, sort of kept up, a sort of not getting back to the top, but sort of being around the top. Sutton took their place now through playing more games. Hartlepool are now on top, but that looks set to change, obviously, with games in hand sort of still to play. Title-wise, who would you sort of bet for sort of getting near the title?
I think you can't be looking beyond Sutton to win the title, to be honest. Now, that's not because I think they're the best team in the league. Quite frankly, they played Halifax recently, and they did manage to get a 2-2 draw after being 2-0 down. But quite frankly, they didn't look like title winners. But I think what will work for them is the fact that they've got 4 games in hand on Hartlepool. I do think Hartlepool probably are the best team in this league, but as I said, they've played 35 games, whereas you look at Sutton, they've played 31. Torquay, they've played 32. So as good as Hartlepool are, I just think that whilst Sutton seem to be diminishing a little bit at the moment, they've drawn their last 3 games against Halifax, against Bournemouth, against Solihull. I just think that those games in hand will see Sutton win the league. Torquay, you can look at them, but that sort of bad run of form that they had, which coincidentally was when Danny Wright was out injured, and now that he's back, they seem to be picking up in form. But I just think that sort of poor run of form that Torquay has will cost them the title.
Also, looking more recently at the form, the one, 4 out of the last 5, whereas the others haven't done as well. So you might sort of say, could there be a bit of an inroad back if Torquay, if they can pick up that sort of form they had at the start of the season, that they could just nick it from Sutton or nick it from Hartlepool?
I think they'll try and push Sutton and Hartlepool all the way. And again, now that Danny Wright is back for them, their form's picked up. So it's not out of the question. But ultimately, I think that sort of poor run of form that they had without Danny Wright when he was out injured will just cost them the title. But I'd certainly consider them. I'd consider them very good contenders for the playoffs if that's what it comes to for them.
And also as well, if you look at the running, in terms of if you do it just from looking at it, but also sort of numerical, looking at sort of points per game teams have had, Sutton would seem to have the easy running. I think if you look at the numbers, the points per game of their remaining opponents, 0.99, whereas Hartlepool 1.1 and Torquay 1.21. You'd have to say, based on the fact then, on general and average, Torquay have got the harder running compared to Sutton. I think that would add in with the games in hand and the more points they've got on Torquay, you'd probably push Sutton. But again, I think the big sort of thing with that is if Torquay capture that sort of early start of the season form, then you have to push him in there. And it's also that I think you find with the playoffs is in normal playoffs in sort of League One and League Two, is that the teams that are up there pushing for it's only one automatic in this league, but in sort of League Two and League One, you've got more the teams that just miss out on the automatic promotion places. They drop into the playoffs, obviously. Then I think it's they must be like disheartened and sort of have the morale kicked, perhaps losing on the final day or something like that. They pushed them out. So when they go into the playoffs, they get absolutely battered, if you like, because the morale's just dropped.
Yeah.
But I think with this,
in this league though, finishing second or third and just missing out on the title still works in your favour because the teams finishing 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th, they've got to play that extra game in the playoff quarterfinals, if you will. So I'm just looking now. Ever since this new playoff format's been introduced, it's been a team that's finished either second or third that's won it. 2018 it was Tranmere, 2019 it was Salford, 2020 it was Harrogate. So I think this season, whoever finishes second or third will end up winning the playoffs, and ultimately, I think that'll be Hartlepool. We were saying about the running there, by the way. I think what will be a big thing as well is that Hartlepool aren't even playing on the last day of the season. Now, I can't remember if they were meant to play in Dover or Macclesfield, but obviously it was one of the two, and that's why they're not going to be playing on that last day. So that gives Sutton a big advantage in terms of knowing what they need to do. Obviously, that's assuming that Torquay don't make a real push. So, yeah, Sutton will win the league, and then Hartlepool and Torquay will obviously be your two big contenders for the playoffs, in my opinion.
That's exactly what I was just going to sort of say, and it's true that the difference is in your League One or League Two is that the teams that finish bottom of the playoff league, if you like, bottom of the playoffs, have a better chance than if with now. And I think that is partly down to that they have more time to recover mentally and physically because they sort of get a bye, if you like, to the next round. But the teams down near the bottom, they got to play those games and sort of they're playing those games and it tires them out compared to the team near the top have a bit of fresh legs. So I think that's sort of the difference with the playoffs. Whether or not they intended to do that with the playoffs, I don't know. I was having a look. I couldn't really find any other playoff systems like this within football. I was asking. I think I might have asked you last year. Is there any other leagues I couldn't find any, you couldn't find any? So I don't know if they designed it like that or knew that would happen. Or it's just a funny coincidence. But,
I suppose it's only right that you get an advantage if you finish higher up the table. I suppose from a neutral point of view, you'd rather have all of the teams in the playoffs have an equal chance of winning them. But I suppose when it's your team, you'll feel it's only fair that you get an advantage if you finish in those higher positions. So, and speaking of advantages, I think what the teams in the playoffs will be looking at is they'll be sweating over whether fans are going to be let in time for the playoffs or not. Because obviously, if that does happen, then what I imagine will happen is that only home fans will be let in for those games. So I think there will be a big push for the teams in those quarter-final positions to finishing 5th or 4th, because if they end up with 2 away games in the quarter-final and then the semi, they'll be left at a big disadvantage if they've not got fans at those games, whereas the home teams will have. So, yeah.
Other 2 teams that are up there, Stockport and Notts County. Now, weirdly, although after what's happened, this is obviously League 2, but Forest Green, got rid of their manager while they're sort of near the top of, I think. I'm not paying massive attention to League 2, obviously, but at the top of League 2 even. 2 teams who, despite being up there, got rid of their managers. Obviously, Stockport, different sort of reason, obviously, which you sort of spoke about in the Stockport video we did with Stockport County podcast. Stockport and Notts County, what we're saying about them, I think the obvious thing with Stockport is Paddy Madden, obviously who they brought in, would be key for them.
Yeah, you think so, but I don't think he's had the desired effect for them. You know, they've paid Fleetwood, what was it, something like $250,000 for him. And you look at how he's done, okay, he's contributing well on the pitch, but he's only scored 1 goal in 7 for them, which, if you're spending that sort of money on a striker in the National League particularly, you've got to have an immediate return in terms of goals, because it's just a waste of money otherwise. That being said, Stockport, the decision to sack Jim Gannon, obviously, what's been said about it has been said. Personally, I disagreed with it, but I think it sort of worked out for them. I don't think they're going to be my favourites for the playoffs, but I think they'll certainly get in there, and they'll be a tough side to beat. But ultimately, I just think they don't look to be brilliant, so I think they just will maybe crumble against a side, one of the more informed sides like Chesterfield, or they'll just get overwhelmed by a Hartlepool or a Torquay. And with Notts County, it's a case of they're not looking good at all at the moment. Like, do I think the decision to sack Neil Ardley was right? Potentially. I think he just kind of lost that relationship with the supporters there. And obviously, as soon as you lose the fans, you're at the point of no return. So I think even since the new managers come in, they've not looked great. There's not been a real signs of improvement. That being said, though, Enzio Baldwin is capable of producing moments of magic, like when Halifax were all over Notts County at their place recently, he just produced a little bit of magic for their equaliser out of the blue. So if they do get in Notts County, I don't think they'll win them. No, like, I'd consider them outsiders if I'm being honest. But if Baldwin can step up, then they might just have a chance. But if I was a Notts County fan, I wouldn't hold hope out for promotion, to be honest.
Do you want to make a sort of any sort of prediction, if you like, for how it may finish going from 1st to 7th? Do you want to do that? Or
yeah, sure. So yeah. I think in terms of the teams, it'll stay as it is, but obviously the positions will swap, and this is how I think it'll end up. So you'll have Sutton winning the league by virtue of the games in hand, Hartlepool 2nd, Torquay 3rd, Chesterfield 4th, Halifax 5th, Stockport 6th, and Notts County 7th.
I think I sort of generally agree that Notts County I think it will probably still stay around the same sort of teams. I think Notts County would probably say ones that finish the bottom of that sort of mini league, if you like. I think see Chesterfield obviously going up. I'd probably say, I think you'd have to, the games in hand, it's Torquay are 4 points off, but I think the 3 games in hand, Torquay, I think that might just be what pushes them just that little bit above sort of Hartlepool perhaps, but it's the games in hand obviously for Torquay.
Yeah.
The games in hand that all the teams have on Hartlepool, I think is going to be key for them. But it's about can they get them all played. I think that's the key thing, where obviously you'd rather have the points, but I think that's the key thing is how many.
Yeah.
It's all right having the games, but you've got to win them. And I think that will obviously be the big advantage that all the teams looking to get ahead of Hartlepool in any type of way.
I mean, with Hartlepool, it's just like I think any of the teams in the top 7 we'll be looking at those sort of games in hand. You look at Notts County and Chesterfield in particular, they've got 5 games in hand on Hartlepool. But that being said, I did watch Hartlepool on BT at the weekend against Notts County, and they just looked a fantastic side. I think if the games in hand weren't there, I do think Hartlepool would end up winning the league. So I think, although you do have the point about the games in hand, I do think that Hartlepool will just keep winning, and ultimately that'll keep them in the top 3 for me. So I just still see them finishing second in that top 3, but they won't drop out of that top 3 at all, even if that does see them drop to third rather.
Before we go, we've got a few stats. Now, what I've done is, just to clarify, I've took the last 3 seasons, obviously, with these playoffs from the National League North, and National League South. I've converted everything to points per game and then put it into 46 games. So with National League North and South, you've obviously got the stuff that only play 42 games. So I've adjusted for that. Obviously, they've had 46 games this season, so I probably should have done 42 now thinking about it. But 46 games being played, these are the type of numbers you would sort of need, which are going to be on screen now looking at it. And stuff like that. So if you want to go and have a look at that, and going to do a thread on Twitter reviewing some of the teams, I think, just sort of pointing out who's going to do well. So those numbers are sort of what you look at for a 46-game season. Obviously, 42 games, you might need a little bit less. Those are numbers then that all teams are going to be looking at, thinking these are the amount of points that we need. And it does vary a bit. You've got easily a good 5 to 10 point gap within what you need, depending on season. So it's going to be sort of interesting to see which teams, get where and stuff like that. Also, do you want to shout out, obviously Halifax fan, obviously talk about National League. Is there anything, people want to find out what you do and stuff like that? Where would they find you?
Yep, so they can find me on Twitter using the username @LewisRWalsh, no spaces. There you can find me talking about the National League. I've started writing about women's football at the moment for a website called FAWSL Full Time. So you can see me witterings, you can see me writings about football in general. So yeah, if you want to go see that, just go find me Twitter @LewisRWalsh. Again, no spaces. So yeah.
There you go. We'll leave that in the description. And anyone, we're going to be doing a playoff video once all teams have got in the playoffs, looking at some more stats. We're going to talk about some of the stats in this video, but then we sort of realised so many teams that it would just essentially be a normal sort of stat. But once we get the playoffs in, we'll know exactly the 6 teams that are going to be in the playoffs, and then we can do stats on all of them throughout the whole season and stuff like that. So that's what we're going to do for the playoff video. So be sure to subscribe and we'll hopefully get that obviously before the playoffs start. And you can do stuff like this in general. We'll speak to fans and stuff like that. So if you like that type of content, then be sure to subscribe. And thanks to everybody for watching.